In March 2011, a record 9.0 earthquake struck just off the coast of Japan, triggering a massive and devastating tsunami and killing nearly 16,000 people. Not only was the earthquake one of the worst environmental disasters in history, but in the moments that followed, the world watched in horror as a massive wall of water crippled the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. In the days ahead, the crisis only heightened, and a series of explosions confirmed the worst fears, a full-blown meltdown of 3 of the plant's nuclear reactors. Unfortunately, both the Japanese government and the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, have gone to great lengths ever since to downplay the disaster and continuously cover up the true severity of the crisis. Even today, there is no end in sight to the fallout, and the cleanup process is far from over. Furthermore, conflicting reports on radiation levels make it incredibly difficult to know what's really going on. Just this month, the Radiation and Public Health Project reported that the level of thyroid cancer in children, an ailment directly associated with exposure to radiation, is 40 times above normal for children near the site. Yet 3 years after the earthquake and subsequent tsunami, we're left with more questions than answers. To help me sort through some of them, I'm joined by Paul Gunter, Reactor Oversight Director at Beyond Nuclear. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, Abby.
So, a couple years ago, TEPCO actually admitted itself that 300 tons of radioactive water is spilling into the Pacific Ocean every day. I mean, following your assessment and from everything that we've been hearing based on the leaks, what do you think is going on right now?
It's sort of a nightmare version of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, where Tokyo Electric Power Company has completely lost control of basically 2 sources of radioactive water that are flowing into the plant and these 3 destroyed reactors and then flowing out back into the Pacific Ocean. One flow is from all the cooling water that's washing over these 3 melted cores to keep the accident from blowing into another full-blown catastrophe. The other source of water is groundwater flowing into the wreckage, and they basically have lost control of all this. They've been trying to pump it into this huge tank farm that's now probably more than 1,500 tanks that are accumulating water saturated with radioactive strontium, cesium, and they've been trying to filter this out in a test procedure, an experiment that's going on there to try to gear up so they can filter radioactivity out. But again, this is only a test. It's been up and down, it's broken, it's failed, it's leaked, and this is ongoing.
I think, Paul, once people see the process, that's when it really settles in of how horrific the situation really is. Because yeah, they're filling up fresh water to cool the reactors and putting all the radioactive water into these tanks. There's literally thousands of these tanks on site, and 1,000 of those tanks are leaking. So we have disaster after disaster. On top of that, the contaminated soil that's being gutted and packed in plastic bags. No end in sight. What are they going to do when they run out of room to store this radioactive water, Paul?
Well, there is really no management plan here at all. This is, again, it's an experiment. All the liability is going to be shifted to the future generations that are going to be left with this legacy without any benefit. But clearly, right now, the Tokyo Electric Power Company is able to basically control the information while the accident remains out of control. And that's a big concern.
That is a big concern. They've been really tight-lipped on a lot of things, Paul. Let's talk about the ice wall that we keep hearing about. It's 1.5 kilometers of underground ice being built to keep the soil around the reactors frozen. I mean, what are the major problems with this idea?
Well, again, this is another experiment. It's unprecedented to use this kind of technology, which has a very limited history where they've been able to freeze ground under large bodies of water so that they could dig tunnels. But again, this is just a temporary procedure. We're talking about putting piping down to bedrock, 90 feet down into the ground, spacing these pipes every 3 feet for more than a mile, to put a perimeter that then they will pump refrigerant into the pipes to try to get the the temperature down to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And they're anticipating that this will then freeze the water that's flowing from the mountains behind the Fukushima Daiichi site and form a wall. But already, a procedure that they say they're scheduled for completion in March of 2015 has already broken down in the initial testing phase, and they're not able to get the refrigerant down to that level of freezing. So again, this experiment is going to, projected to now last for decades while they try to bring that groundwater flow under control.
And what about the children in Fukushima? As I mentioned in the intro, they're experiencing 40 times higher rates of thyroid cancer. I was wondering if we could talk about what radiation does to the human body.
Well, there is a whole host of cancers, diseases that are caused by ionizing radiation to not only to organs but to the DNA. And clearly the thyroid gland is recognized even by the American Thyroid Association as being particularly vulnerable in children to exposure to radiation. And what we're seeing is without question a spike that in the incidence of thyroid cancer in children and young, particularly the younger children. But it's, again, we're seeing now 3 years into the accident already a spike in early onset. This kind of onset can go on for decades now. So we're only seeing the initial climb in this spike of disease.
Paul, earlier mentioning TEPCO, the extreme secrecy, the tight lip on information, the censorship, and they were even hiring Yakuza mob members to pay back debt to do the cleanup process. People who are completely inexperienced with actually how to do that. What about the disinformation campaign? And then you hear the other side of the story, which is that it's so bad it's going to poison everyone on the West Coast, everyone stop eating fish. I mean, I guess sort through kind of what we know and I guess, the assessment of how bad this really is for people on the West Coast.
Well, I think that what we have seen is that, once again, when the powers that be lose control of their reactors, they look to control the information. And this has been true with every nuclear accident that we've seen to date, Fukushima only being the most recent, but clearly perhaps one of the most worrisome. The government had the wherewithal for looking at the weather, looking at the release rates of radiation in Fukushima, and then projecting where those radioactive clouds were going to go. But they withheld that information from the public. You had entire populations spontaneously evacuating from one zone, but moving into the radioactive cloud because the government withheld information. Tokyo Electric Power Company has been time and time again revealed to basically show that it has no control or knowledge of the radiation levels that are releasing from this wreckage. And it's our concern that it's actually deliberate, that they're withholding information, that they're misconstruing it as incompetence when in fact it's deliberate.
Oh, no doubt. And I can't help but think of the 23 sister reactors from that GE also owns and operates, almost nearly identical design, to the Fukushima reactors here in the U.S. Are we going to be awaiting potentially kind of the same disaster that Fukushima experienced? I mean, what can we do to shut these down? We have about 45 seconds left.
Well, I think the basic concern is that we have 23 of these Mark 1s, and we have 8 more of the Mark 2s, which was Fukushima Daiichi Unit 6. But these reactors, from the very beginning, we've known, don't have containment. These reactors, if faced here in the United States with a significant fire, a break in a dam that floods the reactor site, we could see as bad or worse an accident.
And as we've seen with Chernobyl, the sarcophagus is cracking. There's no way to store this safely. There's no way to really do this safely. So thank you so much, Paul Gunter, Reactor Oversight Director, Beyond Nuclear. Appreciate it.